Okay, hello everybody, and thank you for dialing in this Monday morning. So, just to look at what we're going to go through today, we're going to start with just getting to know you, so just finding out where you all come from. We'll then look at the new apprenticeship standards and dive in a little bit more detail to the on-programme, the assessment gateway, the endpoint assessment, and why you may want to work with Pearson going forward. Okay, so we'll just start with looking at the changes of the current SACE frameworks and the new Trailblazer apprenticeship standards. Firstly, the old SACE frameworks, the on-the-job and off-the-job training as part of the apprenticeship, learners would have to complete a qualification. That was mandatory. So it was either NVQ and technical certificate, or in the logistics, it was a hybrid qualification of the two. Learners would then also complete their maths and English, their functional skills. They'd complete their personal learning and thinking skills, and they'd have to complete the employer rights and responsibilities in the logistics industry qualification as well. Once those were completed, the learner would then be able to complete the apprenticeship and get their certificate. So we know with the changes with the apprenticeships, we've moved away from having the mandatory qualifications. So qualifications are no longer mandatory. Sometimes they're defined within a standard or assessment plan, and they can be optional and built in to the learners, the apprentices learning through their on-programme part. Maths and English are still there. There are requirements of the new frameworks. And the new thing is the formative assessment of behaviours. So within all the new apprenticeship standards, as well as identifying the skills and the knowledge that the apprentices require, employers have identified behaviours that those learners need to be occupational competent. There's a few additional parts to it. So we've got the gateway where employers and the providers sign off the learners so that we know they're ready for endpoint assessment. And then we've got the endpoint assessment part. So we'll go into a bit more detail with these in a second. Okay, so one question that we've been getting asked a lot is how do the new standards map to the old frameworks? Obviously the new standards have to be occupational relevant. So we've got large goods vehicle driver that would have mapped previously to the driving goods vehicles pathway 3 or pathway 4 apprenticeship. Warehouse operative, obviously that maps to warehousing and storage. Supply chain operative, this one's mapped to a couple of old apprenticeships. So we've mapped it to traffic office, commercial moving, and logistics operations. It's got a bit of a mix of all those areas, and we'll talk about that in a little bit more detail later. And lastly, the express delivery operative. So this is something new for the sector. Really, it's quite exciting, and we'll talk about that as well in more detail shortly. Okay, so now we're just going to look at the journey that a learner takes on their new apprenticeships. So firstly, we'll just look at LGV driver. The initial assessment, it is written within the standard and the assessment plan that a learner must have achieved their Category B license before they can start the on-programme element of the apprenticeship. Whilst they are on the programme, the learner will then have to achieve their Category C or their Category C plus E license, and they must have that before they get to the gateway part, and that is written within the assessment plan as well and the standard. So off the job training, so we know 20% of the on-programme part has to be off the job training, and that can include things, for example, as 1 day a week in the classroom, reflective journal writing, or assignments or research. So there's lots of options there to explore. English and maths, as we said earlier, that's a requirement in the new standards. So learners must achieve their level 1 English and maths, and they must have taken a test for the level 2. So they don't need to have passed their level 2, but they need to have taken a test for the level 2 English and maths. Okay, so once they've completed the on-program part, they'll then hit the gateway onto the endpoint assessment. Once they've passed the gateway and the employer and the provider are satisfied that they're ready for the endpoint assessment. So for this standard, learners will take a short answer question, a scenario test, and also complete a practical driving test. Following on from this, once these have been achieved, they will hit their completion. This cannot be achieved sooner than 12 months from the start of the apprenticeship journey. And what Pearson will do is once an apprentice has achieved their endpoint assessment and they've completed, we'll deliver a digital endpoint assessment certificate, and if required, that can be printed. Okay, so moving on, a lot of this is the same for the 4 standards, so I won't go into, or I won't repeat myself with a lot of it. So warehouse operative, obviously similar thing. We've got the initial assessment, 20% off the job training, the achievement of English and maths at level 1, but again they must have taken the level 2 tests. Within the assessment plan, it has been mentioned that a learner could take the level 2 certificate in warehousing and storage, and achievement of that can go towards the evidence of going through the assessment gateway. Endpoint assessment for this one is short answer questions and scenario test and a practical test. And again, they'll move on to the completion. Supply chain operator. So the standards for supply chain operator have been split into 2 different pathways. So we've got traffic office and removals operative. So the apprentice will select either traffic office or removals operative pathway to specialise in. They'll do that whilst before they hit the on program, so they know what they are gathering evidence of. So again, you'll have the 20% off the job. Level 1 English and maths must be completed, and level 2 English and maths tests must be taken. Endpoint assessment, again, similar to the warehouse operative, we got a short answer questions, the scenario test, and the practical test, and then completion. And then finally, express delivery operative. So this is to be signed off and agreed by the DFE still. So I know the Trailblazer group have submitted their assessment plan and they are eagerly waiting for feedback on it. The thing to notice here is that the endpoint assessment is different in that they've got a multiple choice test, a role simulation, and also professional discussion. So we're now going to look at the on-program part. So what is meant by on-program? There's no mandatory qualifications within the new apprenticeship standards. There's development of the apprentice's English and math skills. As mentioned before, apprentices will now cover behaviours as well as their knowledge and skills, and the behaviours have been identified by the employer groups. The apprentice will be on programme for a minimum of 1 year, and that is a requirement. The apprentice will also have progression milestones during their on-programme journey, and it is recommended within the LGV, driver, warehouse operative, and supply chain operative that they will have quarterly meetings as well based on those milestones. And lastly, Ofsted will be responsible for quality assurance on programme delivery. Okay, so I'm just going to talk quickly about qualifications to support on programme. So I said qualifications aren't mandatory within the new logistics standards. The only exception really being is within the LGV driver, which requires learners to achieve their Category C licence before they take their endpoint assessment. Some employers may require them to take their Category C+E as part of that. But we have had some questions from people, providers asking about delivery of qualifications for the on-programme part. So why would they want to deliver a qualification? It will help the learner achieve a recognised accredited qualification to show the learning they've carried out through the on-programme part. And it also provides a structure for delivery and guidance for centres. So what have we got available? We've recently developed a level 2 technical certificate for warehouse operatives, and that's been mapped to the new warehouse operative standard. And we also have the current qualifications that you'll all know and delivered for the SACE frameworks. And we have mapped those to the new standards, and we're hopefully going to get those available to you as soon as possible. So a couple of things to note about the funding of qualifications if you do think about delivering qualifications for on-programme. Funding can't be used for the registration, the examination and certification costs. It can be used for some or all of the delivery where there is a clear overlap between the training and the knowledge, skills and behaviours needed for the apprenticeship standards. So the cost of the registration, examination, certification will need to be covered by the employer if you do decide to deliver a qualification for on-programme. And the cost of delivery where there's no overlap, that would also have to be covered by the employer. So as I said, at the moment we have carried out mapping of our current SACE apprenticeship qualifications to the new standards, and we will make that available as soon as possible to you, and we'll make sure that's notified to you all when it is available. Okay, so now we're just going to quickly cover the assessment gateway. So the purpose of the assessment gateway, during it, the employer, apprentice and trainer assessor will be involved, and it's to check that the apprentice has achieved the knowledge, skills and behaviours that are outlined within each of the standards. Once it is determined that that apprentice is ready, they'll be able to progress onto their endpoint assessment. We'll help provide a checklist for this. So something that we're looking at, which we will offer, is that we will be part of that checklist, and we'll confirm that the requirements of the gateway have been achieved before that learner has undertaken endpoint assessment, so we can help make sure that those learners pass first time. Okay, now we'll just quickly go over the endpoint assessment for each of the standards. So LGV driver endpoint assessment. As I said earlier, there's two assessment parts to it. So we've got a short answer question, a scenario test, and a practical driving test. Now within the assessment plan, it states that it's ideally to be taken over a 1-day period, and learners must achieve 70% for a pass and 90% plus for a distinction. Each part of it is equally weighted, so it's both 50%. The knowledge and behaviours which will be assessed during the short answer question and scenario test are outlined in Appendix 1 of the assessment plan. The guidance in the assessment plan is that the test will be 1 hour, and there'll be at least 2 scenario-based short answer questions. The practical driving test, within assessment plan, it does say that it can be taken within a large goods vehicle or virtual reality technology can be used for a learner to take that test. Again, it states that it's a 1 hour practical driving test, and the skills that are required to have been met in it are again outlined in Appendix 1 of the assessment plan. So I've combined warehouse operative and supply chain operative together on this one because the endpoint assessment is the same. So again, there's two methods. We've got the short answer question and scenario test and the practical test. Again, learners must achieve 70% for the pass and 90 plus for the distinction. They are equally weighted again, so 50% for both. And within the appendice, we got knowledge and skills outlined for the short answer questions and scenario test, and the skills outlined for the practical tests in each of those assessment plans. Both of them be 1 hour, and within the short answer questions scenario test, there'll be at least 2 scenario-based short answer questions. Okay, and then moving on to express delivery operative. As I said, this is still to be confirmed, as we're still waiting for sign off from the DFE. But again, it is graded as a pass and distinction, so 70% for a pass and 90 plus for a distinction. There are 3 parts to it, so we've got the multiple choice test, role simulation, and professional discussion, with a bigger emphasis being on the role simulation, where that's 50%, and a learner will either pass or fail that part of it. The assessment plan gives us indication that will be about 45 minutes, and there will be a choice of 8 scenarios within it. That's for the role simulation, and it will cover areas such as skills and behaviours, technical operations, safety, and contingency plans. The multiple choice test, that is 25%, and it will be graded fail, pass, or distinction, and it covers the knowledge within the standard, so covering technical operations, finance, safety, and contingency plans. The assessment plan gives the guidance that it will be a 45-minute test with 25 questions. And lastly, professional discussion. That's 25% with a fail, pass, or distinction grading. And it will cover knowledge and behaviours in technical operations, finance, safety, and contingency plans. And the assessment plan gives us guidance that it will be 30 minutes. Okay, so moving on to the Register of Apprentice Assessment Organisations. So what is it? The Register of Apprentice Assessment Organisations, or what we call the Register, is a list of organisations that have been assessed to being suitable to conduct independent endpoint assessment of apprentices and be receipt of public funds. So we are in the process of creating an application to go onto the register for the LGV driver, warehouse operative, and supply chain operative standards, and we hope that we'll be able to come back to you with some more news on this progress in the next few months. Okay, now we'll just look at the delivery models for endpoint assessment, because there are some different options here that we're going to be exploring within our application. So the first one is for direct delivery, and this is where procurement of off-the-shelf endpoint assessment for a specific standard. So for example, you'd come to us and we'll deliver the endpoint assessment for the standards that you come to us for. So for LGV driver, we'll offer the tests and then offer the practical driving test as well. The next model that we're looking at is a partnership delivery. So we know many of you work in a consortiums, and you've got your own assessors who'll be able to deliver endpoint assessment within those consortiums. So the partnership delivery model is where we subcontract the physical assessment elements to another organisation to utilise their assessor resources. Pearson would be accountable for the endpoint assessment, And that's something important to note, is that the assessors must be employed within a separate organisation or separate legal business entity. If you want more information on these models, the best thing to do is to contact your account manager, or you could contact myself. I'll give you my details at the end, and we can discuss this in more detail. Okay, lastly, so why work with Pearson on the new apprenticeship standards? Okay, so as you know, we've been offering apprenticeships within logistics as well as other sectors such as business, construction, health and retail for many years, and we've been working very closely with employers, training providers on development of the new standards. We have a dedicated team at Pearson who are supporting us on the development of our endpoint assessment offers for the new standards. And we are working on developing a support package for you and your apprentices to help you deliver the new standards for the on-programme part and the endpoint assessment, so we're covering the whole basis of it.